Insert generic introduction song here. All previous versions of this song have been copyright struck. What's up, guys? I am back from my 2-week hiatus. I feel as though YouTube is giving me mandatory vacations, but if you're listening, YouTube, they've become a little bit too close together. I don't need this much time off. Seriously though, guys, I am uploading again, but I'm on 2 strikes until basically the end of June. So if I get a 3rd strike, they're gonna pull my entire channel. So I would really ask you guys to go into my pinned comment below, go to my Rumble or my BitChute or my Odyssey, whichever channel you would like to, and subscribe to it, because I don't upload to those channels regularly now, but I will, obviously, if they take my YouTube down. And as of right now, as long as I have this YouTube channel, I will still be uploading content to those other platforms that I deem too controversial for this platform. And I'm really trying to get my legs underneath me, finding out what is too controversial and what isn't for YouTube, because it shouldn't be hard for me to respect their community guidelines if I just move anything that I think is not going to be acceptable onto an alternative platform and I let you guys see it there. It's not a big deal, but it's just very hard determining what exactly they're going to say is their community guidelines, because it's very subjective and it's up to them. At the same time, I can't just worry about the content that I release now, because the past 2 times that I've gotten these strikes, it's been on content that was over 6 months old. So I also, at any moment, like I'm on 2 strikes now, and they haven't given me any strikes while I was on strike, but they could give me another one at any moment and delete my channel based off of my old content. So I've gone through that old content, and I've deleted some videos that I thought might have been pushing the edge, but it's really just impossible to tell. And the truth is that it's so subjective, it could be anything. So I'm on the edge, guys, and just keep that in mind. They could take it all away tomorrow, and I'm trying to build something here, but it hasn't even really gotten started yet. So if YouTube is not the place for us, then I will be continuing this journey on an alternative platform. So there's that. I don't want to be the channel that ends up talking about this all the time. The censorship that I've been going through is unbelievable. I wouldn't believe it if it was not happening to me, but it's not what I want to make my channel about. Although it is kind of related to what we're going to talk about today. And today we're going to talk about the United States Postal Service is spying on us. And not only that, but we're going to talk about it in the context of some previous episodes I've made on, I don't know if you guys remember this, but there was an entity in Chicago called CPIC. It was a fusion center, and we talked about these fusion centers that were all throughout our country, where they were fusing different kinds of intelligence together, whether that be military intelligence or civilian, and they were also combining that with real-time data coming from traffic cameras and warrant databases, etc., so that police officers were able to access this information, everything from social media posts to criminal records at the touch of a button, because of these fusion centers. Well, now it's come out that the Postal Service is an integral part of this fusion center intelligence gathering philosophy, and they're spying on the United States citizens. So everybody's wondering, well, who are they spying on and why? And there's been some pretty good guesses as to what that is, so we're going to look into it. But in order to look into that, we need to go back and think about what I've been talking over the past few months with you guys about DVEs, or domestic violent extremists, and about how all of this stuff that sprouted out of the January 6th event seems to be centered around basically criminalizing patriotism. Even if it's not 100% successful in the way that they want to do it, understand that at this point they have already successfully muted a lot of people, because people who are not as passionate about these types of things as I am, they're not going to be talking about it. It's not worth the headache. Now, going to an event like what happened on January 6th, people are worried, like, am I going to be on somebody's phone and end up getting called in for questioning? Am I going to get arrested? This is a real fear that they've put into people, But notice it's only happened to the people on the January 6th event. All of the things that were going on in Portland and Kenosha and everything leading up to that, those people don't have that fear instilled in them. Of course not. As a matter of fact, you have, 20 some people who died in those riots throughout Kenosha and Portland. We covered that in detail. I made, hours of content about those riots. And we know exactly how violent they were. They were extremely violent. And, there was the whole mostly peaceful protest meme, where the news anchor is literally reporting in front of a burning down building. But I mean, the reality is there was a lot of people who were shot. There was just a lot of outright violence. So when I'm seeing the way that the January 6th event is being treated in comparison to the rioting that had gone on to the year leading up to that, one almost would say, oh yeah, but that's the conservative, the left-right thing, right? Because it does seem like conservatives are treated differently than Democrats in the Capitol. But it's more than that. And let's just go look at the deaths that happened at the January 6th event. So on April 7th, 2021, the causes of death were released for all of the deaths that they recorded at the January 6th Capitol event. They were unable at the time to release the cause of death for the officer, although the New York Times and many other news media outlets made no qualms about going out and saying what they assumed had happened. But they were able to report on the 4 out of the 5. So we have 5 deaths at this savage riot at the Capitol that has caused all of these ancillary prosecutions of people and the collection of databases and cell phone records, all of the things that have happened. They're looking at insurrection charges and such. On April 7th, we have the cause of death of 4 of the 5. Let's go through them. So the first one is Ashley Babbitt, and we went over Ashley Babbitt pretty in detail. We saw the situation that happened around her death. She was shot by a police officer that is still to this day anonymous. They have not released the identity of that officer. The entire situation was very odd, especially around that Jaden X character that was there and did most of the filming, especially the filming of the shooting. There's a lot of high strangeness around that. But we're going to move on from that, and we're going to leave it there. If you want to really look into this topic, I highly recommend that you get on an alternative platform and dig into the footage of the Ashley Babbitt shooting. So she is, in my mind, one clear fatality as a result of this event, if you take it at face value, okay? If we're taking that situation at face value. Kevin Greason, 55, died of natural causes from cardiovascular disease. So this guy had a heart attack, and he's going on the casualty list. Now, if we were to keep track of the deaths and fatalities at the riots over the year leading up to that, the deaths would be astronomical if we started counting natural causes. Now, of course we don't count natural causes in the deaths of all those riots. We shouldn't. But that also means we shouldn't be counting it here. He didn't die as a result of the riot. He had a heart attack, and yet he's in this casualty list. I don't find that to be legitimate, removed. Benjamin Phillips died of natural causes from cardiovascular disease. So, a second person who had a heart attack. Okay. So we have 2 heart attacks that are in the list of 5 fatalities. That's 2 out of 5 that are just heart attacks. They did not die from the result of the riot. So, no, don't count. I don't count it. Roseanne Boylan, 34, died by accident from acute amphetamine intoxication. We have a drug overdose and 2 heart attacks on our list of 5. So we have Ashley Babbitt, who was shot by the Capitol police officer, who remains nameless, and that whole situation. Then we have 2 heart attacks, then a drug overdose, and 5, of course, was Brian Sicknick, Officer Brian Sicknick, who was laid to rest in the Capitol building, who the New York Times did several pages about, and who was put up as the true victim of these riots. Because, of course, they don't want to make a victim out of one of the rioters, right? So he was the one that was put up. There was immediately pushback about this, because this is the story about the officer who was supposedly hit with the fire extinguisher, and then there were a couple of people who were charged with spraying mace and getting it on him. All of that supposition was happening while the medical examiner had not released his findings. Interestingly enough, the medical examiner was able to determine 4 out of the 5, but he just couldn't figure out that last officer. Now, he just couldn't figure that one out. Well, now the information has come out from the medical examiner, and it turns out that he died of completely natural causes as well. So far, to the extent that the medical examiner went as far as saying the strokes that he suffered, he died of strokes that were suffered the next day. The strokes weren't related to any injuries he might have sustained during the riots, according to the examiner's determination. There's no way that they can say that any injuries that he even sustained during the actual riots could even have remotely correlated to his death. So now we have 2 heart attacks, a drug overdose. We have Ashley Babbitt, who was shot by the Capitol Police officer who will remain nameless. And now the Capitol Police officer who was supposedly murdered at the hands of the Capitol Hill rioters died of natural causes. Here we have this narrative, right, built around this one incident. Out of that sprung these latest policy letters that we've gone over with the Biden administration, where they talk about domestic violent extremism and how this is the worry of the future, right? This is our new boogeyman. It's no more real than the Al-Qaeda was the boogeyman, but here we are, and so this is the turn, and so this is the event that is leading to the narrative. It's getting concerning because, like I just showed you, the outright falsehoods that are coming from the media, because this riot is put forward as if it is just this horrible thing that happened where all these people were being violent and destroying everything. We saw the destruction of we know what real rioting and destruction looks like, and we saw what happened at the January 6th event. They were a bunch of morons and some idiots, and they literally caused the least amount of damage as possible while breaking into the Capitol and rummaging through it. You had people in the rioting crowd that were yelling, "Don't do that, everybody, let's be good." I mean, like, it's completely bizarre that this is the riot that they want to label as violent and insane and an insurrection, right? It's completely insane. And the narrative is so patently false that only one person died as a result of this riot, Ashley Babbitt. And the other people, 3 natural causes and a drug overdose. How is that ever going to lead to statistics about people who died from the riot? It's insane. And yet, everybody just reads and keeps on going. The New York Times quietly retracted their story saying that the riot led to this officer's death, but the damage is done. The narrative is set. It's already going. There's no way to stop it. And I'm telling you, the same cabal that was doing the Ruby Ridges and the Wacos a couple of 20 years ago, these are the people who are changing the narrative now to DVE, domestic violent extremism, to criminalizing patriotism, to making it scary for freedom-loving people to speak their truth. And the thing that's so scary to me about it is, 1, it's targeted, so targeted, and 2, that it's false. It's built on a falsehood. And so in the midst of all of this, the Biden Justice Department announces that they expect to do 100 more charges over the Capitol riots. So they're digging into this, and they're looking into bringing insurrection charges at certain individuals. And at the same time, the Biden administration, the Biden DOJ, is dismissing all of the charges that were brought against the rioters in Portland. So in the same 2-week period, the DOJ announces that they're going to be furthering their expansion into prosecuting people at the January 6th event, and they're going to be dismissing the charges of all the people in Portland. And this is the narrative that they're not even scared to put this out. It's in news articles that come out a week separated, and nobody says anything. Nobody wants to talk about a double standard. Nobody wants to say that's a little bit strange. And I mean, you can do any kind of Googling that you want to do later on, or DuckDuckGoing, and look up the people who died as a result of the riots leading up to the beginning of the year event in DC. That year of rioting resulted in dozens of deaths. And I'm not talking about heart attacks, strokes, and drug overdoses. I'm talking about gunshot victims, people who were ran over, fighting, people who were bludgeoned to death, victims, perpetrators, There's no perpetrator or victim of a heart attack. So you have these real deaths, the buildings burning down, the meme, everybody's like, haha, the news media keeps saying peaceful protests, and they're clearly not peaceful. But this is what it results in. It results in something serious. It's not funny, Because now we have an entire law enforcement arm that's gone off into this tangent of domestic violent extremism, and at the same time they are letting off the people who razed that area of Portland to the ground and then sealed it off and declared themselves a sovereign territory in the middle of a United States state. But that's not a problem. That's not insurrection. They're not insurrectionists. Not insurrectionists. This is why it's so concerning to me, the story about the post office, because if they're this far off track, if my opinion on what they should be worried about is so diametrically opposed to what they are worried about, then I'm really worried about hearing that they're spying on whomever and whatever and however they want. So we're going to get into that. But first, we're going to use a little bridge. We're going to bridge from this story over to the next one, because one of the things that was craziest about the January 6th event was an Intercept article that I read. The FBI seized congressional cell phone records related to the Capitol attack. The inclusion of congressional phone data in the FBI investigation raises thorny constitutional questions because, when you start spying on congressional people, that's going to raise some questions. You can spy on whatever civilians you want. Within hours of the storming of the Capitol on January 6th, the FBI began securing thousands of phone and electronic records connected to people at the scene of the rioting, including some related to members of Congress, raising potential thorny legal questions. Using special emergency powers and other measures. Using special emergency powers and other measures, the FBI has collected reams of private cell phone data and communications that go beyond the videos that rioters shared widely on social media, according to two sources with knowledge of the collection effort. This is the kind of surveillance that, before the Patriot Act, people used to care about this, you guys. Like, a lot. People used to really give a shit. And now nobody does. But people used to really care back in the day. And now they just, the January 6th event happened. 5 people are dead. We're taking everybody's cell phone records, everybody's computers. We're seizing congressional people's cell phones, everything that's there. It's all getting collected, all getting used and stored off of the auspices of this horrible event that happened on January 6th, where one person was shot and killed. 2 people died of a heart attack, 1 person died of a drug overdose, and 1 person died of a stroke. So they've spawned this giant spying campaign off of this event. Within hours and days after the Capitol riot, the FBI relied in some cases on emergency orders that do not require court authorization in order to quickly secure actual communications from people who were identified at the crime scene. Investigators have also relied on data, quote, dumps from cell phone towers in the area to provide a map of who was there, allowing them to trace all call records but not content from the phones. So they'll be able to trace the call records, right, using the tower, but not the content. But wait, they can then take the call records and plug them into the other database and get the content. So don't think for a second that they don't have the content of every phone that they want to look at that was at the riot. Now think about that. From here on out, anybody who goes to a protest, they are now going to have to go there under the assumption that they're going to ping their phone off a tower, even if they don't make a call. They're going to be listed as having been at the event, and even though they didn't do anything wrong, could someday have somebody knocking at their door. Because that's what they're saying they're doing right here, and nobody cares. Nobody cares. The cell phone data includes many records from the members of Congress and staff members who were at the Capitol riot the day to certify President Joe Biden's election victory. The FBI is searching cell towers and phones pinging off cell sites in the area to determine visitors to the Capitol. If that doesn't terrify you, then nothing will. And this is such a gross overstepping of their powers to spy on us and go through our papers and our personal effects that it's just amazing to me how docile the population is hearing about this. It's amazing to me. The data is also being used to map links between suspects, which include members of Congress, they also said. Imagine how horribly they got the whole idea over the people who were killed at the riot. The fact that there's an obvious narrative being put forth, and then the vast powers that are given over to the police state to just see, hey, whose phone numbers are pinging off of these towers? I want a list of every person who had a phone in this area. And yep, they get it. And then if they're a person of interest, they take that number and they go do a 702 about query like they did on Donald Trump. They do it on regular citizens. Whenever I was going over the NSA situation, I kept saying, if they're willing to do this to a president, I cannot begin to tell you what they're doing to all of us. And now it's becoming pretty clear. Every single person who was at the Capitol event is on a list now. Every single one. Whether you were a lawful, law-abiding citizen or not, if you were there, you're on a list. But this episode is about the Postal Service scandal and about them spying on us. But the reason why I wanted to cover this about the January 6th event in such detail at the beginning of this is obviously there's a general connection to it. But also, I'm about to go through a Gateway Pundit article with you where the Gateway Pundit thinks that they know where the Postal Service got the list of conservative type folks to spy on. And I'm going to read you their opinion, and hey, it's a pretty good theory, but I also beforehand wanted to give you guys my own theory, and that is this article here. They spell it out in clean English that every single person that was at the Capitol Hill incident that had a cell phone, their cell phone pinged off that tower, and the federal authorities have gotten that entire list of all those people. And so if it isn't what the Gateway Pundit thinks it is quite possible that a list was formed from that day. And they've already admitted that they have the ability to do it and that they did do it. And the question is did they just do it to everyone? My answer to that is obviously yes, they did. Why do I say that? Because if the government can do this, and they are doing it, they will do it all the way. There's no question about it. They are not going to just do this halfway. If there aren't checks and balances to prevent them from going all the way, then they will go all the way. And they are, quote, searching cell towers and phones, pinging off cell sites in the area to determine visitors to the Capitol. Understand, if they can do that then, and right there, they can do that always, everywhere. The Justice Department has publicly said that its task force includes senior public corruption officials. That involvement indicates a focus on public officials, i.e. Capitol Police and the members of Congress, a retired FBI official said. And then this article goes on to talk about how it's extremely dangerous for the bureaucracy to be seizing the assets of members of Congress. But that is just a small part of this to me. Before they're members of Congress, they're American citizens, and they shouldn't be doing this to any of us. But they were, and they are. And they were doing it in the mindset of domestic violent extremists. Okay? That's how this is all coming together. Right? And when they say that they did that of all the people who were there and associated with it and pinging random towers, Roger Stone was there, Alex Jones was there, every conservative commentator was there. Tons of YouTubers were there, influencers were there. Every single person who was there, they're going to take your records, and they can, and they just said it in the Intercept, and nobody cares. The only people who supposedly care are the senators, because it says here on January 11th, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse released a statement warning the Justice Department against getting involved in the investigation of the attack, at least regarding members of Congress, asserting that the Senate should oversee the matter and saying that it's because of separation of powers. So the senators step in to say, hey, you can't just collect our information because of separation of powers. But who is saying anything about the tens of thousands of people who were just regular folks that were there? They committed no crime, yet their cell phone number is being pinged. The FBI is putting them in a database in a list of people who attended that rally. So you have all of this surveillance that's spawning from this event. It's all being targeted towards this DVE crowd, right? And now we've got this story about the post office. Now here comes the post office. Stick with me. I'm gonna cut out here. I'll be right back. So now we're at April 21st. The Postal Service is running a covert operations program that monitors Americans' social media posts. Okay, so we've talked about the giant surveillance system and state that was kicked off by the event in January. And we've talked about the policy letters and the executive orders that have come out of the Biden administration in regards to domestic violent extremism. This giant security apparatus that spawned from this event in January is built on a lie, and the entire event is the lie, right? Because from beginning to end, and I gotta tell you guys, maybe I'll do a video about it someday and put it on BitChute, but there on BitChute you can find people who go through the footage of that riot, frame by frame by frame, and you can go through it with one of them, and it is Just unbelievable the way that was played out in the media in comparison to the other riots in the year leading up to it. But so we have this event that happens. It spawns this domestic violent extremism law enforcement wave that is now changing the culture of federal law enforcement right now as we speak. And the culture change is shifting away from international terrorism and towards this new domestic violent extremism. This is going to be the new boogeyman. Now, in the midst of all that, I was talking to you about how I'd done the previous episode about the Chicago Fusion Center and how there's this new fusion of intelligence gathering done in the States. Intelligence gathering powers that had previously not been authorized in the United States, but that have ever since the Patriot Act have been operating freely and with no regard. And so now this post office story has come out, and it's really causing people to be highly concerned. But in reality, people are really missing the story, because the story here is how they are just a small cog in the wheel of the intelligence gathering apparatus that the United States government has on their domestic citizens. But let's get into this article. The law enforcement arm of the U.S. Postal Service has been quietly running a program that tracks and collects American social media posts, including those about planned protests, according to a document obtained by Yahoo News. Didn't know that the post office had a law enforcement arm? Well, they do. The details of the surveillance effort, known as ICOP or ICOP, or Internet Covert Operations Program. Now, just listen to that. Internet Covert Operations Program. If that anagram isn't a nightmare to you, just hearing those four words placed together in that order is truly terrifying to me. And it just tells me that if you're talking about the information battle, the information war, we've lost it, you guys. We've already lost it. If the post office is collecting all of that on us and there's no oversight, we've lost it, guys. The work involves having analysts trawl through social media sites to look for what the document describes as inflammatory postings and then sharing that information across government agencies. And that's really important, because when we're talking about this in the context of the fusion centers, all of these government entities have these programs, you guys. They're creating this environment in our country where it's very much class warfare, and it's also very much governmental workers versus civilians. And I'm telling you, write it down. They're creating this kind of environment. It doesn't matter what federal agency you're interacting with now these days. If you're putting out some kind of vibe that is going to make them feel like they need to report you to the DVE hotline, they've got one. Bet. Analysts with the United States Postal Inspection Service, the USPIS, Internet Covert Operations Program, monitored significant activity regarding planned protests occurring internationally and domestically on March 2021, says the March 16 government bulletin, marked as law enforcement sensitive and distributed through the Department of Homeland Security's fusion centers. Locations and times have been identified for these protests, which are being distributed online across multiple social media platforms to include right-wing leaning Parler and Telegram accounts. So just understand, we have the law enforcement arm of the Postal Service. These are feds. They're investigating social media posts, inflammatory language, and sharing all of that information across agencies. Image 3 on the right is a screenshot from Parler indicating two users discussing the event as an opportunity to engage in a fight and to do serious damage, says the bulletin. So if I say that we're going down to the protest to fight for our rights, and that we're going to do serious damage to the injustices in this country, does that mean that I'm on the list here? Because it sounds like that means I'm on the list. What is inflammatory language? Isn't that subjective? Aren't we supposed to keep that out of it? What happened to that? People keep saying, oh, YouTube's a private company, so they can censor you and destroy your freedom of speech. Okay, fine, but these fusion centers aren't. The United States Postal Service isn't. Why are they doing it? No intelligence is available to suggest the legitimacy of these threats, it adds. So you made a bulletin, you wrote all this up, and you don't even have any intelligence to suggest that anything you're saying in the bulletin is legitimate? The bulletin includes screenshots of posts about the protests from Facebook, Parler, Telegram, and other social media sites. Individuals mentioned by name include one alleged Proud Boy and several others whose identifying details were included but whose posts did not appear to contain anything threatening. Oh, so their posts had no threats, and yet they were named in this governmental agency bulletin. Named. ICOP analysts are currently monitoring these social media channels for any potential threats stemming from the scheduled protests and will disseminate intelligence updates as needed. Wow. And when I did the episode about CPIC and the Chicago Fusion Center, the whole reason I got off onto that tangent is because Chief of Police had nonchalantly said that they had found out that the rioting had moved uptown because of social media posts, that the police had seen on social media that the riots were getting ready to move uptown. And so they were able to reallocate people and weaponry in order to put that down. And I was like, wait a minute, you have people just sitting around trolling social media posts? That's real? And so then I found out about fusion centers. And that's how I knew that all of this was happening before now we're getting this here. The government's monitoring of America's social media is the subject of ongoing debate inside and outside government, particularly in recent months, following a rise in domestic unrest. And there's the narrative, right? And every single story that comes out is going to have this narrative, right? There's this narrative that's building very hard, the DVE narrative, and then there is the narrative around law and order that's being perpetrated right now as well, which we might go over that in a different video. We might talk about a couple of these incidences that are being put forth into the social consciousness of our country, and understand that every day tragedy happens to people of all shapes and sizes and colors and walks of life, and it is only a matter of the choices that the people who control the media in our country that they make that allows you to even know about these things. Because of the advent of social media, regular people have been able to bring topics up that they really want to bring people's attention to, but that has come with a negative effect because there's also lots of other ways that people can be manipulated using that idea. So it's no safer in this world with social media so that people can, film something that happens and keep putting it on social media if the news media won't cover it. It's not a safer world with that information available, but it is a world that has more information in general. You just have to be able to discern through that information. While posts on platforms such as Facebook and Parler have allowed law enforcement to track down and arrest rioters who assaulted the Capitol on Jan 6, such data collection has also sparked concerns about the government surveilling peaceful protesters or those engaged in protected First Amendment activities. Why the post office would now move into social media surveillance, which would appear to have little to do with the mail deliveries, is unclear. Well, Jeff, let me go ahead and tell you, since you're a security expert and you worked for Barack Obama, they use the post office because there's no oversight. This seems a little bizarre, agreed Rachel Levinston-Waldman, Deputy Director of the Briand Center for Justice's Liberty and National Security Program. Based on the very minimal information that's available online, it appears that ICOP is meant to root out misuse of the postal system by online actors, which doesn't seem to encompass what's going on here. It's not at all clear why their mandate would include monitoring of social media that's unrelated to the use of the postal system. Levinson-Waldman also questioned the legal authority of the Postal Service to monitor social media activity. If the individuals they're monitoring are carrying out or planning criminal activity, that should be the purview of the FBI, she said. If they're simply engaging in lawful protected speech, even if it's odious or objectionable, then monitoring them on that basis raises serious constitutional concerns, aka it's illegal. The U.S. Postal Inspection Service did not respond to specific questions sent by Yahoo News about ICOP, but provided a general statement on its authorities. The U.S. Postal Inspection Service is the primary law enforcement, crime prevention, and security arm of the U.S. Postal Service, the statement said. As such, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service has federal law enforcement officers, postal inspectors who enforce approximately 200 federal laws to achieve the agency's mission: protect the U.S. Postal Service and its employees, its infrastructure, and customers, enforce the laws that defend the nation's mail system from illegal or dangerous use, and ensure public trust in the mail. So basically the post office says, we're not telling you nothing, and here is our vague general statement that allows us to have our own police force that monitors American civilians. Wow. The Internet Covert Operations Program is a function within the U.S. Postal Inspection Service which assesses threats to Postal Service employees and its infrastructure by monitoring publicly available open source information, the statement said. Additionally, the Inspection Service collaborates with federal, state, and law enforcement agencies to proactively identify and assess potential threats to the Postal Service, its employees, and customers, and if its overall mail processing and transportation network. In order to preserve operational effectiveness, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service does not discuss its protocols, investigative methods, or tools. So basically, screw off, we do what we want. The Post Service isn't the only part of the government expanding its monitoring of social media. In a background call with reporters last month, DHS officials spoke about that department's involvement in monitoring social media for domestic terrorism threats. We know that this threat is fueled mainly by false narratives, conspiracy theories, and extremist rhetoric read through social media and other online platforms, one of the officials said, and that's why we are kicking off engagement directly with social media companies. And now we're going to touch on Operation Chokepoint, because just like they're using these banks to castigate and isolate Republicans or conservatives, they are also pressing hard on the social media front to do the exact same thing, and they're coming out and saying it just right out. And something that people aren't talking about, Gab. In the past month or so, Gab's had 4 different banks drop Gab. And that's the real Operation Chokepoint. That's where the real horrible crap is happening. But it's also here. It's the censorship of my channel. Because I don't follow the main narrative that is put forth by the system, I am what they call a conspiracy theorist and extremist rhetoric. That's what I am to them. That's why I'm on 2 strikes. And it doesn't matter. The truth about who I am or what I believe does not matter at all to them. And that's just facts. DHS is coordinating with civil rights and civil liberties colleagues as well as our private colleagues to ensure that everything we're doing is being done responsibly and in line with civil rights and civil liberties and individual privacy, the official added. So, in case you've had your head in the ground for the past 50 years, we'll give you this blanket statement and you just believe us. Every time the government has been given the ability to spy on somebody, it has abused that power every single time without fail. Stone, the University of Chicago professor, questioned why the post office would be tasked with something like identifying violent protests 2 months after Jan 6 attack, which would appear to have little or nothing to do with the post office's role in delivering the mail. I just don't think the Postal Service has the degree of sophistication that you would want if you're dealing with national security issues of this sort, he said. Ahaha, but you're wrong. That part is puzzling, he added. There are so many other federal agencies that could do this. I don't understand why the post office would be doing it. There is no need for the post office to do it. You've got the FBI, Homeland Security, and so on. So I don't know why the post office is doing this. It's so hilarious to me that these experts are so befuddled by this. If you want to know why they're using the post office for this, beyond the explanation of the fact that I have explained several times, the concept of these fusion centers, they use every single government agency and private agency that works with the government to collect any kind of intelligence they can, and it all comes into these fusion centers. Then it's disseminated to where it needs to go from there. Or just any agency can come to the fusion center and access the raw data. Beyond that, the reason why they're using the Postal Service is because there's no oversight for what they're doing. And it's very sad that that Yahoo article we're reading, and the Yahoos who broke the story with the pamphlet that I'm going to show you guys here in a minute, and they have these experts on that are just completely dumbfounded as to why they're using the post office, and the answer is so obvious. It's insane. If you want to know why, all you have to do is go back to 2015. Back in 2015, the New York Times did a story about the Postal Service's program that they had to spy on people. It was called the Mail Covers Program, okay? And it allowed the post office to keep a record of all the mail that came to and from any address. And they weren't allowed to actually go into the mail, supposedly, but they were able to keep these track of all of the mail pieces that came to and from a place for various intelligence agencies. And the reason why it was exposed is because a report was issued about it, and they weren't safeguarding the information that they were taking from American citizens. And that's what the report was on, not the fact that they were illegally collecting private information about American citizens. No, it was because they were stealing that information, and then they weren't securing it properly. But I read an article back when this happened. It was written by somebody who had had an experience being found out that he was on the covers program, right? And as soon as I read, why are they using the Postal Service? Why are they using the Postal Service? It immediately clicked to me about that article I had read. Postalnews.com. This is back in 2015, and again, this is about the post office's spying program that they had back then called the Covers program, but it implies, when I read this article to you, you're going to know exactly why they're using the post office now. And I would, of course, be remiss to not point out at this point that this article was written by John Kiriakou, who is a CIA whistleblower. He blew the whistle on a little thing called the CIA torture program. I don't know if you guys remember that. And he now speaks out for whistleblowers and anyone trying to expose the truth of our federal government. Okay, back to the article. The U.S. Postal Service is spying on us, and they're not doing a very good job at it. I'm not talking about peeking into letters or looking at how many mutual fund statements you receive. I'm talking about the systematic collection of information on every single piece of mail you send or receive, including the names and addresses of the sender and recipient without a warrant or oversight, and without any explanation to the person being targeted. Indeed, the USPS Inspector General has even issued a report saying that the Postal Service failed to properly safeguard documents that included the names, addresses, and financial information used by its law enforcement arm to monitor the mail of people suspected of criminal activities or for national security purposes. The USPS mail cover surveillance program is poorly run, poorly managed, and could reveal personally identifiable information and compromise the security of the mail, the report said. What makes this program particularly dangerous is that there is no judicial oversight, no appeals process, and no way of knowing why any one person is under surveillance or when the surveillance began or will end. I know I'm under postal surveillance. So in that paragraph right there, you can see why this article clicked in my head, because this is why they're using the post office. There's no oversight whatsoever on the legal arm of the post office. So the writer of this article found out he was on the program, right? So he says, I served 23 months in prison for blowing the whistle on the CIA's illegal torture program. Having been locked up for 2 months, I decided to commission a card from a very artistically inclined prisoner for my wife's 40th birthday. I sent it about 2 weeks before her birthday. She never received it. Finally, about 4 months later, the card was delivered back to me with a yellow, quote, return to sender, address not known sticker on it. But underneath that sticker was a second yellow sticker. That one read, do not deliver, hold for supervisor, cover program. Why was I under Postal Service surveillance? I have no idea. I had had my day in court. The case was over. But remember, the Postal Service doesn't have to answer to anybody. My attorneys, my judge, even its own inspector general. It doesn't need a warrant to spy on me or my family, and it doesn't have to answer to even a member of Congress who might inquire as to why the spying was happening in the first place. And I just wanted to jump in here real quick and give my brief explanation on what I think happened with this particular writer. He was in the federal prison system, and I'm assuming that once you're in the federal prison system, you get put into the mail cover program automatically. Remember, this program keeps track of the addresses and return addresses on all the mail coming to and from your home. This would be something that's very beneficial to a correctional officer or to a prison, because inmates in prison will have other inmates write letters to their loved ones in schemes to get commissary exchanged for drugs or to get money or to get all kinds of things set up. And so to have the family members of the person in prison and having the person in prison himself be in the cover program is not a shock, because that intelligence would be very useful. If you're keeping track of who's writing to and from the wife of an inmate, and the husband of another, or the wife of another inmate writes her, or another inmate from the same prison writes her, then they're going to make use of the cover program in that circumstance. And he said himself that while he was inside, he commissioned this drawing for his wife, and it didn't show up until after he got out, but it was put into the cover program obviously while he was still in. And something that obviously could possibly have happened was that it got caught in the bureaucratic nature of the BOP, and it sat at the supervisor's desk as part of the cover program for 4 weeks and nobody did anything with it, and then they tried to mail it off, or whatever, and something happened to it because they just suck at their jobs. And he got the letter after he had gotten out. So the question still remains, is he still on the cover program? Because remember, this piece of mail happened while he was still inside. It would not shock me at all that he was on the cover program while he was inside. It wouldn't shock me to find out that everybody was. But I also would like to know, was he removed from that once he got out? Because the only way he thinks that he's still on this program is from a piece of mail that was actually sent while he was in. All right, back to the article. The problem is not just the sinister nature of a government agency or quasi-government agency, it's a government agency. Spying on individuals with no probable cause or due process, although those are serious problems. It's that the program is handled so poorly and so haphazardly that in some cases surveillance was initiated against individuals for no apparent law enforcement reason, and that surveillance was initiated by Postal Service employees not even authorized to do so. Again, there is no recourse because the people under surveillance do not even know that any of this is happening. So back in 2015, that's what was going on. It's this, now they have upped their ante, they've doubled down on their police surveillance powers, and they're still doing the exact same thing with no oversight. And just like they were able to collect all that data without a warrant or any oversight, they're now doing it again. And these experts want to know why the federal government is using this small law enforcement arm to do this kind of spying. And the reason is because there is no oversight. So then we'll go over to the Gateway Pundit because I want to talk to you really quick about their spin that they had on this story, and it's a really interesting take. They're saying that they're making the supposition that they understand where the post office got its list of people to spy on, because people are wondering if you are keeping track of these DVEs and you're worried about the protests of the Protest for Freedom protest, right? Then it's pretty clear that you're targeting a specific group of people, and they were wanting to know, well, where did you get the information? Where did you get the list from? And the Gateway Pundit has an interesting little idea about how that happened. Now, it's not factual, so we'll put that disclaimer out there, but it's an interesting idea. So they go over the information that I've already gone over with you about the flyer, and I'm going to show you the flyer in just a second, and about everything I read to you about the Proud Boys and everything. And they say, from the information we have, we can easily deduce that the USPIS is targeting and spying on conservatives and not radical, violent, and destructive liberals. But how would they identify Americans who are conservative? Those God and country-loving Americans who believe in freedom and don't agree with communism. How could the USPIS build their list? We believe that maybe the USPIS didn't build a list of conservatives to spy on, they stole it. Last year, only days before the Republican convention, the deep state Democrat lovers in the government, God, the Gateway Pundit's almost hard to read now. I'm just going to sum this up for you guys. So they're talking about when I covered this, but when Brian Kolfage, United States veteran, Army veteran, and Steve Bannon, and all of those guys with the Build the Wall project were arrested, and they were indicted for supposedly misappropriating funds or whatever. It was an obvious hit job on, obviously, Steve Bannon, and we were wondering why it was Kolfage. Well, the Gateway Pundit, they point out that it was actually the US PIS that came and arrested Kolfage, because it was like a dozen of them or more, and he's a triple amputee, and it was like a dozen or more of them showed up, fully automatic weapons, and they were mean to him, trying to get him into the car. They wouldn't let him get his leg and stuff. It was horrible. The Gateway Pundit's saying that they had that list of donors. They confiscated that list of donors from Kolfage. As reported at that time, 15 members of the New York United States Postal Inspection Service showed up on Brian Kolfage's doorstep to arrest him on August 20, 2020. It took 15 USPIS officers to arrest a triple amputee war hero in a wheelchair at his home with his wife and 2 children. They dragged him to a car and forced him to pull himself into it. They didn't allow him to grab his prosthetic legs or provide a vehicle that would allow him to use his wheelchair. In the rain in front of his wife and 2 young children, Kolfage carried himself to the car and pulled himself into it. You know, whatever our feelings are about our current state of our country and the legitimacy of these wars that have happened, there's a certain modicum of respect that you, even as somebody who hates America, that you should give to people who have been through things that you haven't been through. When you don't show that respect to people who have been through things that you haven't been through. It just shows your own weakness. So, those 15 fully armed police officers that showed up and arrested that triple amputee veteran and made him do that, those are weak little men. And I'm sure they all have very big trucks. The USPIS officers scoured his house and took information from his computers, including the list of all the individuals, mostly conservative, who donated to the We Build the Wall project. This list included millions of conservatives. You guys, they're right. I don't know if that's this specific instance, if that's what the USPIS is using, but they're right. There's no way on God's green earth that the feds seized that information and they aren't using it to build a list. There's no way that isn't happening. So it's a good catch on the Gateway Pundit's part. Of course, the USPIS claims this was necessary for their case, but what are the odds that they took this list of conservative names and are now spying on those same individuals who gave to the We Build the Wall project? The prize of their BS case was the list. The actors were secondary. And that's a huge possibility because I read the lawsuit. It seems insane. It's like if those people are going to get in trouble for that, then literally every politician in America needs to go to jail right now. And so if it makes sense that there may have been a secondary objective here and the main objective wasn't the indictment. And then the Gateway Pundit puts their disclaimer. All we have currently is circumstantial evidence this is the case, that the USPIS stole the names of conservative donors from Brian Kolfage to target and abuse and spy on. We do know the USPIS is spying, and we do know they are targeting conservatives. So this is a very, very big deal. And so here's the leaked document that this spurred this entire thing. And I think that there's actually some parts in it that I actually really want to go through. It says the United States Postal Inspection Service, and you can see it says Cybercrime and Analytics Law Enforcement Sensitive, and this was done on March 16th, 2021. So this is the Postal Inspection Service bulletin. This is the language that is in this government entity's bulletin that goes out, okay? So this is an intelligence production of the United States government, and I just want you to listen to the implicit bias in this and understand how dangerous this whole domestic violent extremism thing is becoming. Analysts with the United States Postal Inspection Service Internet Covert Operations Program monitored significant activity regarding planned protests occurring internationally and domestically on March 2021. Locations and times have been identified for these protests, which are being distributed online across multiple social media platforms, to include right-wing leaning Parler and Telegram accounts. Online inflammatory material has been identified, which suggests potential violence may occur. However, there is currently no intelligence to suggest specific threats. Jesus. Image 1 below includes screenshots of 2 event pages that are scheduled to take place March 20 in multiple locations. ICOP analysts are currently monitoring these social media channels for any potential threats stemming from the scheduled protest and will disseminate intelligence updates as needed. Analysts identified the website and Facebook group Worldwide Demonstration, which started creating posts for a worldwide rally for freedom, peace, and human rights as early as February 25th, 2021. To date, there are 15,492 followers of this page. On March 2nd, 2021, the event began trending across Parler with the tag Worldwide Demonstration, and we will all be there. Twitter users are also promoting the event using the same tags. On March 6, 2021, the site magafirst.org published a segment asking for each state to participate. Analysts also identified a video created to advertise the event, renamed as Anti-Tyranny Protest March 20. At this time, there are no reliable information to suggest how many individuals have viewed these postings because each state's event is being shared as an independent post. So, the investigatory arm of the United States Postal Service is investigating hashtags and disseminating that information out across multiple agencies. And they're doing this off of no reason other than it's a protest for freedom and that it's being shared on Parler and Telegram. It's a situational awareness bulletin. United States Postal Inspection Service, Cybercrime and Analytics. It says to the right, a screenshot from the Telegram channel Stop the Steal, which as of March 15, 2020 has 112.9 thousand views for the overall event. Analysts identified another protest titled Global Action to Stop 5G, which is also scheduled to take place March 20, 2021. The group has over 20,000 followers on Facebook and will be hosting events in California, Denver, Virginia, and Vermont. Several Parler accounts have posted inflammatory or violent messages surrounding the worldwide demonstration rally scheduled to take place March 20, 2021. Some users issue warnings the event is a FF created by the government as an entrapment campaign. The prominent Proud Boys North Carolina-based member, known online as Noble Beard, made a comment regarding the event stating that it will be taking place at every state capital March 20th. Okay, so what's wrong with that? So this guy gets himself named and singled out in this document and sent out to all these government agencies because he made a comment that said every state capital March 20th? That is unbelievable. That this document was created in the first place is unbelievable to me. Parler users have commented about their intent to use the rallies to engage in violence. Image 3 on the right is a screenshot from Parler indicating two users discussing the event as an opportunity to engage in a fight to do serious damage. No intelligence is available to suggest legitimacy of these threats. ICOP analysts will continue to monitor postings and provide direct intelligence reports to specific areas of responsibility for any identified posts discussing planned attacks or violent actions. Whew. Wow. So now we have the truth about the extent of the domestic surveillance capabilities of the machine is out. You guys, it strikes me that these so-called experts in their field are so befuddled by why the government's using the post office, and it really strikes to me that me and most of my subscribers and many of the people that I know immediately know exactly why the post office is being used. There's no oversight. Nobody would ever think to use it. That's why it's being used. The real story behind this story is the utter and complete lack of outrage, lack of coverage. Just nobody cares, and it's just unbelievable to me. If we really would all have a frank conversation about the intelligence gathering capabilities of these fusion centers and how all of this data that's being collected is going to be used against us in the future, there's no way that people would be this calm and placated and docile about what they're seeing in the news about how the government is collecting and using this information. And unfortunately, Snowden wasn't enough. Unfortunately, Julian Assange wasn't enough. The Bradley Manning revelations weren't enough. And I don't think this will be enough. I'm not sure that there is anything that's going to get people into an uproar anymore. And if that's the case, then it's just a slow march to totalitarianism. Because if there's not going to be I can't even say that. If people aren't going to stand up for their rights whenever they hear things like this, then it's all over but the crying, folks. So in the next couple of days, I'll be releasing the second part to my UFO series, and I'll have a couple of short videos in the meantime. If you guys would do me the favor, please head to one of my alternative platforms and subscribe to my channel there. That way, if the unimaginable happens here, you'll be able to catch my awesome hot takes on another platform as I narrate and play the fiddle. Alright guys, like, share, subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to leave me a tip, all the ways to do so are in the pinned comment below. All of my sources for this will be in the comment below that. I will talk to you guys soon. Peace.